The steak was cold. I stared down at the plate that had just been dropped in front of me by a flustered waiter, barely making eye contact before scurrying off. Everyone else at the table had long finished eating, their laughter already shifting to cake and toasts. I sat at the far end of the family table, alone, forgotten, unspoken. The scent of reheated potatoes and congealed gravy hit my nose, and I suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. Across the room, my son was laughing with his new bride. Champagne flutes clinked. Her parents were glowing. Mine, well, mine were long gone. But I could still hear what my son said, clear as if he'd whispered it in my ear. She's used to leftovers. It's her whole life story. He chuckled, gesturing toward me. And the room roared with laughter. I didn't say a word. Not when they pointed. Not when her cousin glanced at me with that smirk. Not even when the DJ shifted songs and someone yelled, "Let's get the real party started!" As if the presence of a woman like me had been the dam holding them all back. I stood. Slowly, my chair scraped loudly across the floor, one of the only things all night that made them turn my way, but not out of concern, just annoyance, maybe curiosity. But no one stopped me, not even him. Outside, the summer air slapped my face harder than any insult could. The noise of the wedding grew distant behind me. My heels sank into the soft earth as I passed the rose bushes by the gate. My son had picked the venue because of those roses. Mom, he'd said proudly weeks ago, "It'll be beautiful, classy. A real wedding." But there was nothing beautiful about what just happened. Nothing classy in how they treated me like an old receipt someone found in their coat pocket. Meaningless, worn, discarded. I sat in my car for a long while. No music, no tears. Just the sound of my heartbeat, steady and slow. And something changed in me. Something cracked open, like a quiet whisper that said, "Enough." That night, I wrote an email, not out of rage, not even sadness, just clarity. Cold, calm clarity. But I'll tell you what was in it tomorrow. Because it wasn't just an email. It was the beginning of the end. Or maybe the beginning of me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The subject line was simple. About tonight. I sat staring at it for a long time, hands hovering over the keyboard, my reflection faint in the dark screen. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to guilt him. But I also wasn't going to lie, so I wrote, "You embarrassed me tonight. Not by forgetting to seat me near the family, not by serving me cold food or making me feel invisible, but by turning me into a punchline in a room full of people who only know me as your mother. A joke, apparently. A woman so used to scraps that she doesn't even flinch anymore." I paused there, breathed. But I'm done flinching. The cursor blinked, like it was nodding in agreement. Then I told him what he didn't know, not because I'd kept it secret, but because he never asked. "You don't know the nights I worked double shifts after your father left. You don't know the years I skipped meals so you'd have enough. You don't know the sacrifices I made, because I never wanted you to feel guilty. But tonight, you didn't just forget that. I think you never even cared to know." I didn't cry. Writing it, I was past that. There's a difference between sadness and resolve, and I had crossed over. "You said I'm used to leftovers. You're wrong. I gave you the first of everything I had, my time, my energy, my youth, and I did it quietly. But now, I will be quiet no more. This is not about a wedding. This is about a pattern, one I refuse to continue." I signed it simply, Mom, and hit send. I didn't expect a reply, not right away, but I knew he'd read it, and I knew it would land, whether it would make a dent. That was another question. The next morning, I didn't check my phone. I went about my routine as if the world hadn't just tilted overnight. I made my coffee, fed the cat, and went for a walk. It was cool out, the kind of crisp that wakes your skin. A neighbor, Jeanette, waved from her porch. "You didn't stay long last night," she called. I smiled faintly. Didn't feel like celebrating. She stepped down, robe swaying, coffee in hand. They shouldn't have done that. The way he spoke to you, I almost stood up myself. That stopped me. I blinked at her. "You heard?" She nodded. "He was loud. People noticed. But no one wants to make a scene at a wedding." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not shame, but relief. Someone saw. Someone knew. Jeanette stepped closer. "You raised that boy better. You deserved better. And if you ever want to talk, my door's open." There it was. My ally. Not flashy, not heroic, but solid and real. Later, when I finally opened my inbox, I saw it. A reply. Short subject line, no pleasantries, just one sentence previewed in the email list. "I can't believe you'd ruin my wedding with this guilt trip." And with that, I knew. He hadn't heard a word, but he would. I read his reply 3 times. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to write something back, to explain, to defend. But then, I just closed the laptop. What was the point of explaining pain to someone who calls it a guilt trip? Instead, I walked to the kitchen and stared at the family photo still magnetized to the fridge door. My son was smiling, 12 years old, holding a model rocket we built together. I remembered how proud he'd been. I remembered the burn on my finger from the glue. I remembered everything. But when had he forgotten? That night, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. My sister, Lorraine. We'd drifted after our mother passed, years ago. A quiet drifting, like 2 boats silently going in different directions, neither of us noticing until the distance was too wide to yell across. She picked up on the second ring. "Well, this is a surprise." I hesitated. "Lorraine, I'm not sure why I'm calling. I need someone who remembers me before I became just Mom." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "What happened?" And so I told her about the wedding, the cold plate, the leftover joke, the email, the response. I didn't cry, not until I heard her sniff quietly on the other end. "You always gave too much," she said. "Even when we were kids. Always the peacemaker. Always trying to make everyone comfortable, even when it cost you." That silence came again, but this time, it was heavier, sharper. "I think it's time," she said finally, "to stop begging for respect from people who only know how to take." I sat down slowly, the receiver still pressed against my cheek. My kitchen suddenly felt too small, too familiar, like it held all the years I'd stayed quiet, biting my tongue to keep peace that was never returned. Would it be crazy, I whispered, to take a break? From all of it? From him? "No," she said. "It'd be the bravest thing you've ever done." Later that night, I stood in the bedroom and pulled out the shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters, not from my son, but from myself. Journal entries, pieces of paper where I'd written what I really felt, but never dared say aloud. Notes like, "He forgot my birthday again, but said he was too busy with work. I told him it was fine." Or, "He asked to borrow money. I said yes, even though it meant I'd have to delay fixing the roof." Page after page, year after year. The pattern was there, clear as ink, not just his entitlement, but my silence. Jeanette called the next morning. "You up for a walk?" We strolled down Maple Street in silence for a bit. Then she said, "Did you read that article I sent you last night?" "No, what was it?" About emotional boundaries. It said, "You can't teach someone to love you by loving them harder. I thought of you." I stopped walking. The air felt heavy in my chest, like I couldn't quite fill it. "You think I've been trying to earn his love?" I asked. "I think you've been paying for it, and I think he's been cashing in." I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept cycling through moments I'd buried for years. Christmas mornings, where I watched him unwrap gifts I couldn't afford, pretending I didn't mind skipping dinner the week before. The time he totaled his car, and I emptied my savings for a down payment on another, telling him it was no big deal. And most of all, the countless little humiliations. Forgotten thank yous, quick hang-ups, texts that went unanswered for days. Like I was something optional. Background noise. By sunrise, I knew what I had to do. I walked through the house slowly, fingers trailing across the backs of chairs, photo frames, walls. Every inch of it held a memory, some warm, others sharp-edged. I paused at the hallway closet, yanked it open, and pulled out the suitcase I hadn't used in years. A thin film of dust rose into the light. The last time I packed that suitcase was to visit my son in college. I remember he never even picked me up from the airport. Said he was busy with finals. I took a cab, paid for the hotel myself, still showed up smiling, groceries in hand, stocking his fridge while he scrolled on his phone. I zipped it open. This time, I wasn't packing to visit. This time, I was packing to leave. Not forever, but for me. The idea hit me like a bolt. What if I went away? Just disappeared for a bit? Let him wonder. Let him feel the silence I'd lived in for years. I called Lorraine. "Do you still have that guest room?" "Of course," she said. "Come. Please. I'll make up the bed today." When I hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the old family calendar pinned to the corkboard. Dinner with Nate and Cammy was still written in black ink under next Thursday. That used to excite me. Now it made my stomach twist. I took a pen and crossed it out. Jeanette knocked that afternoon. "I brought you something," she said, holding up a peach pie. I smiled. "Is this a bribe?" She grinned. "Might be, for you to finally do something for you." I told her about Lorraine. The suitcase. Leaving town. She didn't blink. Good. Let him sit with his own echo for once. That night, I wrote one more email, not to him, to his new wife. I hadn't spoken much with Camille. We never really clicked, but I owed her honesty. "Camille," I wrote, "I hope your new life is full of joy. But I won't be a background figure in it. I won't be a punchline at family gatherings, or the woman who quietly drops off casseroles and disappears. I gave my son everything. He's chosen not to see that. Maybe one day he'll understand what was lost." I didn't expect a reply. I wasn't writing for one. I was writing for me. I hit send, and then I folded the suitcase shut, rolled it to the front door, and locked up the house. Lorraine's house still smelled like lilacs and lemon furniture polish, just like it had when we were kids. She hadn't changed a thing, not really. The same faded floral curtains in the kitchen, the same chipped mug that read, "World's Okayest Cook," still sitting by the sink, but the energy in the place had shifted, or maybe I had. She didn't ask questions when I walked in, just wrapped her arms around me, long and tight, and said, "Welcome home." That first night, we stayed up late on the porch, sipping tea and watching moths flutter near the porch light. She let me talk, then fall silent, then talk again. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years. How tired I'd been, how I'd grown used to pretending I was fine, how I once cried alone in a grocery store aisle because my son forgot Mother's Day again. It wasn't even about the card. It was about being seen. Lorraine just listened. She didn't interrupt with advice or sympathy. She let my voice find its own rhythm, and when I ran out of words, she reached over, gave my hand a squeeze, and said, "You didn't deserve any of that. Not a bit." The next morning, I checked my email. There was a message, not from my son, from Camille. The subject line was, "I'm sorry." My chest tightened as I clicked it. "Hi," it began. "I hope it's okay that I write. I got your message, and I've read it 3 times now. I want you to know, I didn't laugh at the wedding. I didn't find it funny. I was embarrassed, but I didn't speak up. And for that, I'm sorry." She went on to say she'd seen how her husband treated me before. Brush-offs, eye rolls, forgetting to include me in things. She thought that was just how guys are with their moms. But seeing the way I walked out, the quiet dignity of it, stuck with her. You deserved better. And I don't blame you for walking away. I think maybe that's what he needed. I read her message twice. Then a third time. She didn't try to defend him. She didn't make excuses. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone really saw me, not just as a mother, but as a woman with a soul and boundaries. I didn't reply, not yet, but I bookmarked it, and I smiled. Over the next few days, Lorraine and I fell into a rhythm. We walked every morning, cooked together in the evenings, even painted old furniture on her porch just because we could. And slowly, the weight began to lift. I laughed more. I started wearing earrings again. I even picked up a mystery novel from her bookshelf and finished it in 2 days flat. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. Read for me. But then, late one afternoon, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. Something in my gut told me to answer anyway. "Mom?" His voice was sharp, clipped. "Where are you?" I stayed silent for a beat too long. "Camille said you left town," he continued. "What is this? Some game? Punishing me because I made one joke? Everyone's talking about how you stormed out." Ah, there it was. Not concern, not reflection. Damage control. I took a breath. I didn't storm out. I left. "There's a difference," he huffed. "You're being dramatic." "I was served cold food at my own son's wedding," I said. "Then you made a public joke about how I'm used to being fed scraps." Emotionally, literally, metaphorically. And the whole room laughed. He was quiet. "I didn't leave to punish you. I left to protect myself." Another pause. Then, "Well, people noticed, and now Camille's parents think there's something wrong in the family." I nearly laughed. Now he cared, because people were whispering. "I'm not responsible for your image, Nate." That's when he said it, the line that pierced deeper than I expected. "Well, you're the one who always told me family sticks together. Guess that was just a lie." Click. He hung up. I stared at the phone, heart pounding, but not from sadness, from clarity. That little boy in the photo on my fridge? He was gone, replaced by a man who weaponized my love to manipulate perception, and I wasn't going to be a pawn in his game anymore. The next morning, Lorraine set down 2 mugs of coffee and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You okay?" I nodded. "Actually, yeah." She smiled, and I could see her searching my face for something. "You look different. Lighter." "I feel lighter." It wasn't an act. I wasn't pretending to be fine. For once, I was fine. Maybe not forever. But for right now, in that quiet kitchen with morning light spilling over the tile and no one expecting anything from me, I was okay. But peace never lasts long when you've left a storm behind. That afternoon, I got a call from Jeanette. "Hey," she said, her voice tight. "I thought you should know. Nate came by." I froze. "To the house?" "Yes." Banged on the door. Wanted to know where you were. Said he was done with games. I told him you weren't home, and that maybe he should try listening instead of yelling. My heart beat faster, not out of fear, but frustration. Even now, he didn't understand. He thought this was some dramatic tantrum, a strategy, as if self-respect was a ploy instead of a right. Did he say anything else? Jeanette hesitated. He said you owe him an explanation. I nearly laughed. Owe him. That night, I sat on Lorraine's back porch, thinking, watching the wind bend the trees like slow dancers. The words he said kept circling in my head. You owe me. What had I owed him all these years? Food, rent, time, patience, understanding, babysitting his dog when he went on vacation, picking up his dry cleaning when his schedule got too tight, driving him to job interviews before he had a license, loaning him money when his credit cards maxed out, listening when he broke up with girlfriends, holding my tongue when he chose the wrong ones. And never, not once, had he said, "Thank you, Mom. You didn't have to, but you did." No. What I owed him had already been paid, in full. With interest, Lorraine came out and handed me her tablet. You should read this. It was a message board, a neighborhood group I hadn't thought about in years. Someone had posted about the wedding. It read, "Anyone else feel weird about what happened at the Sherwood wedding Saturday night? The groom made a leftovers joke at his mother's expense and then laughed as she left alone." I'm not one to gossip, but it didn't sit right. Underneath were comments. I noticed that too, thought it was in poor taste. I didn't know who she was, but I felt so bad for her. If that had been my son, I would have walked out too. I covered my mouth. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. Looks like people saw more than you thought. I sat back slowly, something shifting in my chest, shame turning into validation. It wasn't just my perception. Others had witnessed it, and they'd seen what I saw. A woman dismissed, humiliated, and erased. I spent the next day writing, not to my son, not to Camille, to myself. I wrote everything down, things I hadn't dared acknowledge. How I'd contorted myself into someone smaller so he could feel bigger. How I'd made excuses for his tone, his coldness. How I taught myself to accept less just to keep him close. And how that closeness was never real. It was conditional, based on what I gave. When I finished, I looked at the final line I had written in my notebook. He doesn't know who I am. But now I do. That night, Camille texted me again. Just 3 words. He's spiraling. Help? And I sat there staring at the screen, torn. Because the woman I used to be, the fixer, the mender, would have jumped at the chance to step in, to smooth things over, to protect him from himself. But the woman I was now, she wasn't so sure. I stared at the text for a long time. He's spiraling. Help? My first instinct was still the old muscle memory, to throw on shoes, grab my purse, and rush into whatever storm my son had created. But I didn't move, not for minutes, not even after Lorraine quietly stepped into the room and sat across from me with a bowl of cherries. He's spiraling, she said softly, after reading the screen over my shoulder. I nodded. Apparently. She popped a cherry into her mouth and chewed. And you're supposed to fix that? I guess. She tilted her head. You didn't cause it. No. You didn't insult anyone at your own wedding. No. And you didn't hang up the phone last week like a spoiled child when someone tried to tell the truth. That one made me exhale through my nose. No. So why is it your job to clean up his mess? I didn't have an answer, not one that sounded sane. Lorraine leaned forward. You taught him for years that you'd always catch him. even when he didn't deserve it. That's not love, sis. That's enabling. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. I'm not sure I know how to stop, I whispered. She reached across the table and took my hand. Then this is your moment. Right now, to stop. I didn't reply to Camille's text. Not that night. I took a bath instead, lit a candle, shaved my legs just for me, put on the lotion I always saved for special occasions. Then I crawled into Lorraine's guest bed and fell asleep with the windows open and the sounds of the crickets filling the room like a lullaby. I didn't dream of my son. I didn't dream at all. The next morning, I had an idea. Do you still have your old laptop? I asked Lorraine. She raised an eyebrow. That clunky thing? Yeah, why? I think I want to write something for the community board. You mean the community board? The one where they were all gossiping? I smiled. That's the one. 2 hours later, I had the draft written. I signed it, anonymous, but the message was unmistakably mine. To the neighbors who saw what happened at the Sherwood wedding, thank you. Thank you for witnessing what so many have overlooked for years. I was the mother who raised the groom. I was the woman who was mocked and served cold food at her own son's wedding. I walked out because I realized I'd raised a man who valued appearances more than kindness. It wasn't a tantrum. It was an awakening. For decades, I gave everything to someone who never once said, "That's enough, you've done plenty." I am no longer seeking applause. I only ask that we all remember respect begins at home, and sometimes silence isn't grace. Sometimes it's complicity. Lorraine read it 3 times. Damn, she said. You're not pulling punches. I'm done softening things for people who never cared if I bled. We posted it, publicly, and by evening it had nearly 80 comments. People remembered. They thanked me. Some guessed who I was, others pretended not to know. But the point had landed, and not just in gossip circles, in real hearts. Other women, older than me, wrote their own stories. One said she'd missed her daughter's wedding on purpose because the bride had joked too many times about mom's drinking. Another wrote that her son hadn't spoken to her in 5 years after she refused to co-sign a loan. We had all stayed silent too long. The next day, Camille called. Not texted, called. I hesitated, but I answered. Hi, she said. Her voice was shaking. He saw the post. I didn't speak. He knows it's you. Still, I said nothing. He lost it. Called you ungrateful. Said he made you who you are, that you should be thanking him for giving your life purpose. That made me sit down. And what do you think, Camille? I asked quietly. She paused. I think I married a man I don't fully know, and I think you've given me more truth in one message than I've gotten from him in 2 years. I didn't reply. I let that sit. Then Camille added, He's planning to come back to the house. Says he wants your things out. He thinks you're gone for good. I breathed out slowly. Let him. Do you want me to be there when he shows up? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. No, I want you to watch, listen, and remember. She was quiet, then, softly. I will. I didn't tell Lorraine right away, but the night after Camille's call, as we sat peeling apples for a pie neither of us really needed, I said, He's going to the house. She paused mid-slice. Do you want to stop him? No, I said slowly. I want to let him. She blinked at me. You sure? I've spent too long fighting for space in a house that never felt like mine. Let him walk through it. Let him decide what's worth keeping, and let him feel the cold silence I lived with for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pictured him entering the house, my son, the man I had once rocked to sleep with lullabies and stories. Would he hesitate at the threshold? Would he walk in with confidence? Or shame? By morning, I had a plan. I printed out something I'd been writing, not for the community board this time, not for Camille, for him. It was a letter, but not a pleading one, not a mother's final olive branch. No, it was a ledger, a quiet accounting, a record of the things he'd taken without noticing, and the pieces of myself I'd given without asking for credit. I sealed it in an envelope and had it delivered to the house, tucked in the mailbox before he arrived. Camille texted me 2 hours later. He's here. Then, 10 minutes after that, he found the letter, he's pacing. And finally, he smashed a glass, screamed, and now he's just sitting in the hallway. I turned off my phone. Instead, I walked into Lorraine's garden and started pulling weeds. I hadn't touched soil in years, but the feeling of it beneath my nails, damp, stubborn, alive, was more grounding than any apology ever could be. He didn't call that night, nor the next, but Camille did. He read it, she said quietly, twice. Then he asked me if it was true. All of it. I waited. I told him yes. And what did he say? He said you betrayed him. I almost smiled. Of course he did. Camille's voice cracked, but he didn't yell this time. He just sat there, said something like, I thought I was the one who got abandoned. I inhaled slowly. That sentence, for all its distortion, told me something. He finally realized I'd left, not just the wedding, not just the house, but the role I'd spent decades suffocating inside. Camille continued, He's asking if you'll talk to him. Not yet, I said. Maybe not ever. She was silent. Then she said, I moved out. That surprised me. I didn't sign up for this version of him, she said. I thought I married someone kind, and then I watched him humiliate you and try to erase it like it was nothing. There was grief in her voice, the kind that follows disillusionment. I don't know what comes next, she whispered, but I can't sit next to someone who thinks respect is a performance. I didn't try to comfort her. She didn't need comfort. She needed company. And in that moment, we both understood. We were no longer two women orbiting his world. We were done circling someone who mistook devotion for obedience. That night, I pulled out a folder I hadn't opened in years. Deed papers, bank statements, legal documents. And for the first time, I called my lawyer and said the words I'd always been afraid to say. I'm putting the house in my name alone, removing him as beneficiary. I want to rewrite everything. The lawyer was quiet, then said, Understood. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The deed transfer came through faster than I expected. I held the document in my hands, the ink still smelling faintly like permanence, and for a moment I just stared at it. My name, alone. No co-signers, no attached dependents. Just me, Eleanor May Grafton. I let the paper rest against my chest and closed my eyes. That night, Lorraine took me out to dinner to celebrate. A little Italian place just outside town where the waiters wore suspenders and called everyone darlin'. We ordered wine, real wine, not the boxed kind I used to keep under the sink when company came. I hadn't ordered a glass for myself in years, not because I didn't want it, but because I'd convinced myself it was wasteful. Funny how you stop treating yourself when no one else does, either. Midway through the meal, a woman approached our table, maybe in her late 60s, silver bob, eyes like she'd seen 1,000 little indignities, and swallowed most of them. You're her, aren't you? She asked softly. I looked up. The woman who wrote the post about the wedding. I nodded slowly. She reached out, gently placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, Thank you. Then she turned and walked away. Didn't ask for a conversation. Didn't explain. She didn't need to. Her hand said everything. Back at Lorraine's, there was a message waiting on my phone. From him. I need to see you. 1 hour. At the house. I read it 3 times, then set the phone down and walked outside. The garden was quiet. Moonlight pooled across the marigolds. I didn't have to go. I knew that. But something told me this wasn't about him anymore. It was about standing in the place where it all started. And finally, seeing it clearly. So I went. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already parked. The porch light was off, just like the night I walked out. I entered quietly, the key turning with a soft click. He was standing in the hallway, facing the mirror, the same mirror I used to wipe clean every Friday. Now it had a fingerprint smear across the bottom edge, and he didn't seem to notice. "You came," he said without turning. I didn't respond. He turned then, slower than I expected. His face was thinner, tired. He looked like someone who had run out of ways to win. "You didn't answer my messages." "No," I said. He swallowed. "I didn't know you'd actually leave." "You didn't think I could." That landed. I thought you'd come to your senses." I stepped further inside. "No, I came to mine." He stared at me, something wild and fragile in his eyes. "Everyone's talking. I'm the guy who humiliated his own mother. I walk into stores and people look at me like I kicked a dog." I didn't blink. "And how do you look at yourself?" He flinched. We stood in silence. "I didn't mean it that way," he said finally, voice cracking. "It was a joke. You used to laugh with me." "When I felt safe. When I felt respected." He rubbed his face. "So what now? You done with me? Over one bad moment?" "This isn't about one moment. This is about a lifetime of bad moments you never thought twice about. And now I'm done pretending they didn't happen." He looked around the house. This was my home, too. "No, it was where you visited, where you took, and where you expected me to stay." He let out a bitter breath. "So that's it?" "No," I said quietly. "That's the beginning." He didn't understand. Not fully. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged. He still thought of endings as punishments. I thought of them now as freedom. I walked toward the door. Paused. Then turned back. "You'll be fine, Nate. Or you won't. But either way, I won't be the woman standing behind you holding the umbrella in the rain while you forget I'm soaked, too." I stepped out onto the porch, into the cool night air. Behind me, the door stayed open. But I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I sold the house. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Every room in that place echoed with the weight of who I used to be. The woman who held her breath so others could breathe easier, who smiled while being dismissed, who thought motherhood meant martyrdom. I didn't want to live in a shrine to that silence. Jeanette hugged me tight the day I signed the final papers. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Lorraine was already in the car, waiting to help me load the last box. We didn't cry. We didn't reminisce. We just moved forward. I rented a cottage by the lake. 1 bedroom. Wraparound porch. Creaky floorboards. The kind of place with a stubborn old key and windows that swell in the summer heat. I painted the walls myself, hung wind chimes on the eaves, planted a tomato vine, even though I'd never had luck with vegetables. For once, it wasn't about outcome. It was about doing. Camille sent one more message. She was moving back to her hometown, staying with her sister. She didn't know what was next, but she felt something she hadn't in years. Calm. I wrote back, "May your silence always be chosen, never forced." She replied with a heart. That weekend, I hosted a gathering. Nothing fancy, just some of the women who'd written to me after the letter went viral, strangers who'd become a kind of soft sisterhood. We brought folding chairs and peach cobbler and folding fans for the heat. Lorraine played old music from a Bluetooth speaker. Jeanette brought fresh lemonade and a tiny potted orchid, and we talked. We talked about the sons who forgot birthdays, the husbands who called us too emotional, the coworkers who laughed a little too loudly when we spoke. We didn't dwell in bitterness. We didn't list every wrong. We just told the truth. And in the telling, something healed. Midway through the afternoon, a woman named Clarice stood up. She had soft white hair, a slight limp, and a voice like gravel and honey. "When I was 48, she said, my daughter told me I was exhausting, that I was always asking for too much. I believed her. For 20 years, I believed her." She looked around the circle, but not anymore. There was a quiet ripple of agreement, nods, murmurs, deep exhalations. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the cicadas sang, I stood on the porch of my little house, barefoot and still holding an empty glass of iced tea. My hands were wrinkled. My arms ached from carrying boxes earlier, but my chest felt wide, open. I picked up my phone, not out of habit, but intention, and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed the title, Scraps and Silence. Then below it, Essays by a woman who stopped apologizing for outliving her usefulness. I didn't know if anyone would publish it. I didn't care. I wrote the first paragraph, then the second, and I kept going. Somewhere in the distance, a wedding band played muffled music from across the lake. I recognized the tune. At last. I smiled, not bitterly, but softly. Because yes, at last, I wasn't the woman in the back of the room anymore, pretending the scraps were enough. I was the woman on the porch, telling the story, writing the truth, claiming the ending. And this time, no one interrupted.